The most powerful army in America had no idea how to fight this war. It entered the frontier expecting battle lines, but found enemies who struck without warning and vanished into the land itself. Soldiers marched through silence. Then horses disappeared. Scouts vanished. Gunfire erupted from nowhere. And the farther the army pushed west, the less it understood the war it was fighting. Because how do you defeat an enemy that refuses to fight your war at all? The American Civil War had just ended. Hundreds of thousands were dead. Entire regions had been ripped apart by artillery, disease, and years of brutal fighting. The United States believed it understood modern warfare better than ever before. Its generals had survived battles that turned fields into graveyards. Men who commanded armies at Gettysburg and Antietam now looked west with confidence. Its soldiers marched in formation. Its supply chains stretched for miles. Wagons carried ammunition, food, medical equipment, and heavy weapons across open territory. Its weapons were industrial. Everything about the military was built around one assumption: find the enemy, engage the enemy, destroy the enemy. That system worked in the Civil War. Armies fought for territory. Cities fell. Battle lines moved. But the West obeyed different rules. There were no stable front lines, no predictable battlefields, no capital city waiting to be captured. Instead, the U.S. Army entered territory shaped by nations that had survived through movement for generations. Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche, Apache, nations that understood the plains, deserts, mountains, and seasons in ways most American officers never could. Warriors who could move across enormous distances with terrifying speed. A patrol could ride for days through silence, then suddenly find smoke rising on the horizon. Gunfire erupted from hidden ridges. Horses vanished overnight. Scouts disappeared without warning. And the farther the army pushed into the frontier, the more something became painfully clear. Its training no longer matched the war it was fighting. Because this conflict was not about holding territory. It was about surviving a landscape where danger could appear from anywhere and disappear before soldiers even understood what happened. Chapter 1. Preparing for Napoleon, Fighting a Ghost. The U.S. Army entered the West expecting another conventional war. That belief immediately became a weakness. Many officers still thought in the language of the Civil War. Discipline, formations, overwhelming firepower. Military doctrine still revolved around European-style combat. Large formations, rigid command structures, heavy logistics. The army expected visible enemies and decisive battles. But native war parties fought by completely different rules. There were no permanent lines to defend, no centralized battlefield, no predictable timetable. A raid could strike at dawn, then vanish across hundreds of miles before reinforcements even arrived. Some attacks came during storms, others came at night. Warriors often targeted horses first, leaving soldiers stranded and exposed far from safety. Soldiers called it maddening. One frontier saying captured the fear perfectly. The front is all around, and the rear is nowhere. The army could not force decisive battles because indigenous fighters refused to stay fixed in one place. That changed everything. A conventional army depends on control. Control of movement. Control of communication. Control of terrain. But on the plains, the army controlled almost none of it. Maps were incomplete. Distances were deceptive. A march that looked manageable on paper could become deadly under heat, exhaustion, and lack of water. Meanwhile, native scouts often tracked military columns long before soldiers realized they were being watched. Warriors attacked isolated patrols. Supply routes disappeared overnight. Horses were stolen. Scouts vanished. And every failed pursuit drained the army even further. Heavy uniforms trapped heat. Dust clogged rifles and lungs. Men rode through freezing winters and brutal summers while expecting ambush at any moment. The deeper the army moved into the frontier, the less powerful it looked. And soon, another problem became impossible to ignore. The United States Army was moving too slowly to survive this kind of war. Chapter 2. The Army that couldn't keep up. The U.S. military was built like an industrial machine. And machines are heavy. Army columns dragged massive supply wagons across unforgiving terrain. Wooden wheels shattered on rocky ground. Mules collapsed from exhaustion. Entire expeditions stretched for miles, turning every movement into a slow, vulnerable target. Food, ammunition, equipment, artillery. Every operation depended on logistics. If supplies failed, movement stopped. If water ran low, survival itself became uncertain. Soldiers could not move freely without securing routes, horses, food, and ammunition first. But indigenous warriors operated differently. Many plains fighters could ride enormous distances with almost no supply chain at all. From childhood, many had mastered riding across difficult terrain at extraordinary speed. They traveled light, they knew the land, and they controlled the pace of war. That mobility created a psychological nightmare. Soldiers often arrived exhausted before a battle even started. Meanwhile, native war parties chose exactly when to appear and exactly when to disappear. A cavalry unit could spend an entire day chasing riders across open plains, only to realize they had been pulled farther away from water or reinforcements. Some warriors fired accurately from horseback at full speed. Others used rapid movement to draw cavalry units into dangerous positions. The army kept chasing enemies it could rarely trap. Then the environment itself became another enemy. The frontier was not empty land. It was a survival system that punished mistakes instantly. Blizzards froze soldiers in winter. Deserts drained them in summer. Dust storms blinded entire columns. Water became life or death. But native nations understood the land in ways the military never fully could. Apache fighters in the Southwest used mountain passes, hidden water sources, and brutal desert heat as weapons. Small groups disappeared into canyon systems so difficult that pursuing troops often became lost themselves. Entire army expeditions searched for tiny groups of warriors for months, sometimes years, without success. And every failure damaged morale even more, because the army slowly realized something deeply unsettling. This was not just a military problem. The land itself was fighting against them. But the greatest shock was still coming. Some details and historical records vary depending on sources, but the core events remain widely documented. Chapter 3: When the myth of superiority collapsed. By 1876, confidence inside the U.S. military remained dangerously high. Many officers still believed indigenous resistance would eventually collapse under pressure. Despite years of frustration across the frontier, military leadership continued pushing deeper into native territory with confidence that superior force would eventually win. Then came the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer advanced aggressively against a massive native encampment, expecting another quick victory. Reports warned the village was large, but the scale of the gathering was badly underestimated. Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho forces had assembled in significant numbers. Instead, the 7th Cavalry rode directly into catastrophe. Lakota and Cheyenne forces under leaders including Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse responded with overwhelming speed and coordination. Warriors moved rapidly across the battlefield, exploiting gaps between separated cavalry units before communication could stabilize. Custer divided his forces. Communication broke down. Units became isolated. Dust swallowed visibility. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Defensive positions collapsed under constant pressure. Within hours, the battlefield turned into chaos. The result stunned the country. News of the defeat spread rapidly across the United States. Custer and more than 200 of his men were killed. But the shock went far beyond one battle. Little Bighorn exposed something the army did not want to admit. This was not a scattered resistance barely surviving against modern power. These nations could organize, adapt, coordinate attacks, and destroy experienced military units under the right conditions. The psychological effect spread everywhere. Military confidence weakened. Public fear intensified. If the U.S. Army could lose this badly, what else had it misunderstood? But instead of forcing the military to completely rethink the war, the defeat pushed the conflict somewhere darker. Pressure for retaliation intensified across the country, because after years of frustration, the strategy itself began to change. If warriors could not be controlled in battle, then survival itself would become the target. Chapter 4: Destroy the land, destroy the resistance. The army slowly adapted to a brutal conclusion. Direct warfare was no longer enough. Years of failed pursuits convinced many commanders that conventional military victories alone would not break indigenous resistance. So the conflict expanded far beyond the battlefield. Winter camps were attacked when families were most vulnerable. Food stores were burned. Horses were seized. Even the seasons became weapons. Winter restricted movement. Cold weakened survival. Communities already under pressure faced starvation and exhaustion. And across the plains, one of the most devastating campaigns in American history intensified. The destruction of the bison. Millions of buffalo once covered the Great Plains. Travelers described herds stretching so far they darkened the horizon. For many native nations, they were survival itself. Food, clothing, shelter, tools. But commercial hunting exploded during westward expansion. Railroads pushed deeper into buffalo territory. Industrial demand accelerated slaughter on a massive scale. As commercial hunters and expanding railroads devastated the herds, starvation spread across entire communities. The effect was catastrophic. Entire ways of life began collapsing under hunger, displacement, and constant military pressure. Resistance became harder to sustain when survival systems disappeared. And slowly, the balance of power changed. Not because the army suddenly mastered frontier warfare, but because indigenous nations were being pushed into impossible conditions. The war became economic, ecological, psychological. Reservations expanded. Movement became restricted. Communities fractured under exhaustion and scarcity. And over time, exhaustion replaced mobility. But even then, resistance continued. Apache fighters under Geronimo kept evading U.S. and Mexican forces deep into the Southwest for years. Small bands moved through deserts and mountains that larger military units struggled to navigate effectively. Again and again, small groups proved how difficult this kind of warfare truly was. Because the army had entered the frontier believing industrial power guaranteed victory. Instead, it discovered something far older. Mobility can overpower size. Terrain can overpower technology. And people defending their survival rarely fight by predictable rules. Closing reflection. History often makes military power look simple. More soldiers, better weapons, bigger armies. But survival changes the rules of war. The U.S. Army entered the frontier expecting enemies who would stand still and fight on familiar terms. Instead, it faced nations that understood movement, terrain, and adaptation better than any battlefield manual could teach. And when conventional power failed, the conflict became a war against survival itself. Again and again, history repeats the same lesson. Power is not just about strength. It is about understanding the world you are entering before it changes you first. Thanks for watching. ModeHub Tales brings untold history to life. Stories history rarely tells the right way. Subscribe now to uncover more. Because history doesn't disappear, it waits to be remembered.